Someday, the ads will end. But today is not that day. I have to say, it would be great if I could do this without ads, but since I have no other income at the moment, I kind of need what I can get, so. It's really bad. I'm just now remembering that I hadn't put the videos from yesterday in their actual playlist. Crazy, huh? Oh, looks like ads are over. Yes, I hope they are, because I'm switching over. Someday I may actually finish this animation thing. Or at least make it presentable. But yeah. Hey everyone, it's Friday night. And Friday night is a time for fairy tales. And why do we do Friday night fairy tales? Because when I first came up with the idea, it was essentially the time that I would be, babysitting my niece and nephew while their parents were out on, a date night thing. So I would tell fairy tales. Seem fair enough? It's okay, sorry. Why is my chat window showing not my chat? I don't even know whose chat that is. What the hell? Well, let's start the day off with a nice chunk of scuff. Really? It didn't change? Neko Gunblade. Refresh. It still didn't change back. Why is it still showing someone else's chat stream? Oh, yeah. The scuff is real. Let's show mine if I post something new. It's not showing mine at all now. What the heck? If I do the shutdown browser source when not visible, I don't know. Because it's linked to my pop-up chat window. I don't know why it would show anyone else's. Oh, that was a weird sound. Anyway, yeah. Friday night. And it's fairy tale night. So we're going to be doing fairy tales. Let me go ahead and make sure my other window is going to show the proper chat screen, because it's a little weird to be showing someone else's. Okay, the other one is showing the right one. I'm going to, because I've got those same features set up. Okay, well, maybe life isn't so gosh darn confusing. Okay, that's a lie. Life will always be confusing. But that's what fairy tales are for. To help bring clarity to the confused mind and train children what is good and what is bad. And if there is no prince coming, be your own hero. I have coffee beans floating in my hot cocoa right now. It's a weird thought. Which is strange because they're not bad when they're crunchy, but having them soaking in the hot cocoa has made them soft and chewy, and it's kind of weird. But, did I lose tracking already? Oh, come on. Why can my computer not handle this? It's not that difficult, I swear. Or at least it shouldn't be. Oh, now it popped back up. I do have the Chibi redeems on, so there's that. So if you want to, you can toss a few pages at me and shrink me, making my chibi form. I also have my ear scritches because, honestly, who doesn't love ear scritches? See? Oh, it's hitting me in the face. But ear scritches are nice. There we go. Yep. Oh, right in there. Okay. But yeah, we're here for fairy tales. And if you notice the alert message I sent out, that is the first line of our first fairy tale for the night. And if you saw the thing I posted on Twitter, well, that's me making fun of the title. So I'm going to go ahead and tweet this that I am live because for some reason the elongated muskrat doesn't want things cooperating as well as it should. So Stream Elements can no longer just announce that, hey, you know what? This handsome dog of a wolf is streaming. And I just referred to myself as a handsome dog. I apologize. Okay, let me try this again because as soon as I opened it up, it decided that I didn't need to tweet because I wasn't logged in yet. Yeah. So the book we're reading from is actually the Red Fairy book. It's a collection compiled by several people, but the head of the group was Andrew Lang. And what they were doing were collecting and translating fairy tales from generally around the world. They did the Brothers Grimm ones, they did the Arabian Night stories, they did Hans Christian Andersen. So all of these have ended up in the fairy tale books, and it's overall something like 28 books worth of fairy tales. And I've read the first one on stream already, the Blue Fairy book, and now we're technically in the second one, which is the Red Fairy book. And a few fairy books in, they just started losing track of what color they were on, so they started going teal, gray, violet. So they went the whole rainbow, then they went, oh no, we have more fairy tales. There's an olive one, I believe. I'm going to try to read all of them in order as I get them. Right now I have 5 or 6 of the colors so far. I do plan on getting the rest of them if I get the funding, which is again why I like doing fundraisers. Coffee will probably be the one that pops out the most. I did not set the timer on that one. I probably should. I do have the ones going through Stream Elements, which hopefully Kel will post those, as well as the sales for my own book, which is, up there on my banner. Because I do have my own book of fairy tales. It's the first 16 stories that I read live on streams, which would be cool. I'm trying to keep track of all the ones that I read so I can continue printing them in the order that I read them, so that'd be kind of cool. The first one is just Brothers Grimm fairy tales. And, if you want to read it, you can. The one without the artwork cover is going away at the end of this year. Because, well, it was the first one that I did, but it's also the one that hasn't paid me yet, so I'm just kind of going to stop publishing through them. Whereas the other one I have going through Amazon and Ingram Spark. Quite frankly, I haven't sold enough of them to cover what I paid to get them activated. But, c'est la vie. But anyway, we are doing Friday Night Fairy Tales, and the first one is, of course, the quote-unquote true story of little Golden Hood. Which is interesting because it's the only, well, it's not the only, but it's one of several deviations from the story that we all know and love and or despise, because it put wolves in a really bad light. I've got my own version in my lore novel, which I'm also trying to work on. I'd work on some more if I could get some more inspiration to get behind it, but right now I'm kind of dragging my tail on everything I'm doing because, well, holidays just get me that way. But if, let me go ahead and get over to my library scene, which is the only one that's not a 3D rendering. Well, my theater's not 3D either. I can make that one eventually. But for now, let's just go to the library, which is this one. Ta-da! Let's see, the Red Fairy book. I don't have the name of the author on there because, well, it's several authors. And the person who wrote it was originally criticized for not crediting all the people that worked on it with him. And they weren't in the first book. In this one, he actually detailed every person in his crew. Which, if you go to my YouTube channel, I think I actually left that prologue in the original reading. But as for this one, it's just, well, I kind of wish I could show the art for the book. I would love to get art from my book, but oh, yeah. But anyway, I'm rambling, which is what I do when I don't have a book in front of me, which it looks like I've got a book in front of me. Oh, wait, the head tilt worked. I don't have V-Bridger on. Let's tilt my head to the side. Nope. See, V-Bridger, I actually have full head motion. Well, better head motion. But for some reason, my computer can't handle another graphic program running. And despite the fact I've maxed out the RAM and the hard drive on my current little laptop, I can't fix the video because it is built into the motherboard. But anyway, we're here for happy times, not drunken fairy tales, as I should probably get back to someday. It'd be really interesting if I did normal readings on Friday, then I did drunken ones on Saturday, which I've considered. But as it is, I have a tendency to make commentary during fairy tales anyway. I try not to, but it's just second nature. I mean, it's my nature. I'm a fairy tale wolf, of course. The heck was that? Okay. I apologize for any vibrations you hear because my microphone is oddly sensitive, and it's on a spring-loaded mount, so you'll hear springs if it bounces or moves, or if I accidentally hit the book on the desk, that kind of thing. And eventually I'll see what I can do about my desk here, because well, that's for another time. But for now, let's get into the fairy tales. Especially this first one, because I really did save it to start as opposed to reading it last week. And I just like how this one starts off. Get one more sip before we get started. Magic bean potion. Made from 2 different kinds of beans. Okay. Our first story for this wonderful, absolutely gorgeous Friday Night Fairy Tale session. The True History of Little Golden Hood. You know the tale of poor little Red Riding Hood, that the wolf deceived and devoured with her cake, and her butter can, and her grandmother. Well, you know this true story happened quite differently, as we know now. And first of all, the little girl was called, and is still called, the Little Golden Hood. Secondly, it was not she, nor the good grand dame, but the wicked wolf who was, in the end, caught and devoured. Only listen, the story begins something like the tale. There was once a little peasant girl, pretty and nice as a star in season. Her name was Blanchette, but she was more often called Little Golden Hood, on account of a wonderful little cloak with a hood, gold and fire-colored, which she always had on. This little hood was given her by her grandmother, who was so old that she did not even know her age. It ought to bring her good luck, for it was made of a ray of sunshine, she said. And as the good old woman was considered something of a witch, everyone thought Little Hood rather bewitched, too. And so it was, as you will see. One day the mother said to the child, "Let us see, my little Golden Hood, if you know how to find your way by yourself. You shall take this piece of cake to your grandmother for her Sunday treat tomorrow. You will ask her how she is and come back at once, without stopping to chatter on the way with people you don't know. Do you quite understand?" "I quite understand," replied Blanchette gaily, and she was off with the cake, quite proud of her errand. But the grandmother, like many a princess, lived in another village, and there was a big wood to cross before getting there. At a turn of the road under the trees, suddenly, "Who goes there?" "Friend Wolf." He had seen the child start alone, and the villain was waiting to devour her, when at the same moment he perceived some woodcutters who might observe him, and he changed his mind. Instead of falling upon Blanchette, he came frisking up to her like a good dog. "'Tis you, my nice little Golden Hood," he said. So the girl stops to talk with the wolf, who, for all that, she did not know in the least. "You know me, then?" she said. "What's your name?" "My name is Friend Wolf. And where are you going thus, my pretty one, with your little basket on your arm?" "I'm going to my grandmother's to take her a good piece of cake for her Sunday treat tomorrow." "And where does she live, your grandmother?" "She lives at the other side of the wood, in the first house in the village, near the windmill, you know." "Ah, yes, I know now," said the wolf. "Well, that's just where I'm going. I shall get there before you, no doubt, with your little bit of legs, and I'll tell her you're coming to see her, and then she'll wait for you." Thereupon the wolf cut through the woods, and in 5 minutes arrives at the grandmother's house. He knocks on the door. No answer. He knocks louder. Nobody. Then he stands up on end, puts his 2 full paws on the latch, and opens the door. Not a soul in the house. The old woman had risen early to sell herbs in town, and she had gone off in such haste that she had left her bed unmade, with her nightcap on her pillow. Such a slob. "Good," said the wolf to himself. "I know what I'll do." He pulls the door shut, pulls on grandmother's nightcap down to his eyes, then he lies down all his length in the bed, and draws the curtains. In the meantime, the good Blanchette went quietly on her way, as little girls do, amusing herself here and there by picking Easter daisies, watching the little birds making their nests, and running after butterflies which fluttered in the sunshine. At last she arrives at the door. Knock, knock. "Who's there?" says the wolf, softening his rough voice as best he can. "It's me, Granny, your little Golden Hood. I'm bringing you a big piece of cake for your Sunday treat tomorrow." "Press your finger on the latch, then push. The door opens." "Why, you've got a cold, Granny," she said, coming in. A little," replies the wolf, pretending to cough. "Shut the door well, my little..." "Shut the door well, my little lamb, and put your basket on the table, and then take off your frock and come and lie down by me. You shall rest a little." The good child undresses, but observe this. She kept her little hood upon her head. When she saw what a figure her granny cut in bed, the poor little thing was much surprised. "Oh," she cries, "how like you are my friend Wolf, grandmother." "It's on the cap of the nightcap, child," replies the wolf. "Oh, what hairy arms you have, grandmother." Oh, the better to hug you, my child. Oh, what a big tongue you have, grandmother. The better for answering, child. Oh, what a wonderful mouthful of great white teeth you have, grandmother. That's for crunching little children with. And the wolf opened his jaws wide to swallow Blanchette. But she put down her head, crying, Mama, Mama! And only the wolf caught her little hood. Thereupon, oh dear, he draws back, crying and shaking his jaw, as if he had swallowed red-hot coals. It was the little fire-colored hood that had burnt his tongue right down his throat. The little hood, you see, was one of those magic caps they used to have in the former times, and the stories for making oneself invisible and vulnerable, yada yada yada. So there was the wolf with his throat burnt, jumping off the bed and trying to find the door, howling and howling as if all the dogs in the country were at his heels. Just at that moment, the grandmother arrives, returning from the town with her long sack empty on her shoulder. "Oh, brigand!" she cries. "Wait a bit!" Quickly, she opens her sack wide across the door, and the maddening wolf springs in, head downwards. It is now that is caught, swallowed like a letter in the post. For the brave old dame shuts her sack, and so she runs and empties it into the well, where the vagabond, still howling, tumbles in and is drowned. "Scoundrel, you thought you would crunch my little grandchild? Well, tomorrow we will make her a muff of your skin, and you yourself shall be crunched, for we will give your carcass to the dogs." Thereupon the grandmother hastened to dress poor Blanchette, who was still trembling with fear in the bed. "Well," she said to her. "Well," she said to her, "without my little hood, where would you be?" Hold on. No, "Well," she said to her, "without my little hood, where would you be now, darling?" And to restore heart and legs to the child, she made her eat a good piece of her cake, and drink a good draught of wine, after which she took her by the hand and led her back to the house. And then, who was it who scolded her when she knew all that had happened? It was her mother. But Blanchette promised over and over again she would never more stop to listen to a wolf, so that at last the mother forgave her. And Blanchette, the little golden hood, kept her word, and in fine weather she may still be seen in the fields with her pretty little hood, the color of the sun. But to see her, you must rise early. Again, wolves getting bad reputations with fairy tales. The girl, of course, never doing what she's told, and the wolf getting blamed for it. Wolves just being wolves, And what was she doing admiring his body in the bed? Honestly. Scandalous. But anyway. I have to wait until this week to read that one. If anyone likes the story, please put in a woo in chat. Much woo. Okay. Ouch. Stretch. Okay, there we go. Okay, our next not so wolf or not so anti-wolf story for the evening. Oh man, excuse me. Sorry. The Golden Branch. Once upon a time there was a king who was so morose and disagreeable that he was feared by all his subjects, and with good reason. As for the most trifling offences, he would have their heads cut off. This King Grumpy, as he was called, had one son, who was as different from his father as he could possibly be. No prince equaled him in cleverness and kindness of heart, but unfortunately he was most terribly ugly. He had crooked legs and squinting eyes, a large frightful mouth all on one side, and a hunched back. Never was there a beautiful soul in such a frightful little body, but in spite of his appearance everybody loved him. The queen, his mother, called him Curlicue, because it was a name she rather liked and it seemed to suit him. King Grumpy, who cared a great deal more for his own grandeur than for his son's happiness, wished to betroth the prince to the daughter of a neighboring king, whose great estates joined his own, for he thought that his alliance would make him more powerful than ever. And as for the princess, she would do very well for Prince Curlicue, for she was as ugly as himself. Indeed, though she was the most amiable creature in the world, there was no concealing the fact that she was frightful, and so lame that she always went about with a crutch, and people called her Princess Cabbage Stalk. The king, having asked for and received a portrait of the princess, had it placed in his great hall under a canopy, and sent for Prince Curlicue, whom he had said that this was the portrait of his future bride. He hoped the prince would find it charming. The prince, after one glance at it, turned away with a dreadful, disdainful air which greatly offended his father. "Am I not to understand that you are not pleased?" he said sharply. "No, sire," replied the prince. "How can I be pleased to marry an ugly, lame princess?" But meet kettle. "Certainly it is becoming in you to object to that," said King Grumpy, "since you are ugly enough to frighten anyone yourself." "That is the very reason," said the prince. "I wish to marry someone who is not ugly. I'm quite tired enough of seeing myself." "I tell you, you shall marry her," said King Grumpy angrily. And the prince, seeing that it was of no use to remonstrate, bowed and retired. As King Grumpy was not used to being contradicted in anything, he was very much displeased with his son, and ordered that he should be imprisoned in the tower that was kept on purpose for rebellious princes, but had not been used for about 200 years, because there had not been very many. The prince thought all the rooms looked strangely old-fashioned, and their antique furniture, but there was a good library, so he was pleased, for he was very fond of reading. A prince after my own heart. and he soon got permission to have as many books as he liked. But when he looked at them, he found they were all written in a foreign language, and he could not understand a single word, though he amused himself with trying. King Grumpy was so convinced that Prince Curlicue would soon get tired of being in prison, and so consent to marrying the Princess Cabbage Stalk, that he sent ambassadors to her father proposing that she should come and be married to his son, who would make her perfectly happy. The king was delighted to receive so good an offer for his unlucky daughter, though, to tell the truth, he found it impossible to admire the prince's portrait which he had been sent to. However, he had it placed in a favorable light as possible, and sent for the princess, but the moment she caught sight of it, she looked the other way and began to cry. The king, who was very much annoyed to see how greatly she disliked it, took a mirror, and holding it up before the unhappy princess, said, "I see you do not think the prince handsome, but look at yourself. You have any rights to complain about that?"
"Sire," she answered, "I do not wish to complain, only I beg you do not make me marry at all. I'd rather be an unhappy Princess Cabbage Stalk all my life than inflict the sight of my ugliness on anyone else."
But the king would not listen to her, and sent her away with the ambassadors. In the meantime, the prince was kept safely locked up in his tower, and that he might be as dull as possible, King Grumpy ordered that no one should be able to speak to him, and that they should give him next to nothing to eat. But all the prince's guards were so fond of him that they did everything they dared, in spite of the king, to make the time pass pleasantly. One day, as the prince was walking up and down the great gallery, thinking how miserable it was to be so ugly, and to be forced to marry an equally frightful princess, he looked up suddenly and noticed that the painted windows were particularly bright and beautiful, and for the sake of doing something that would change his sad thoughts, he began to examine them attentively. He found that the pictures seemed to be of scenes from the life of a man who appeared in every window, and the prince, fancying that he saw this man some resemblance of himself, began to be deeply interested. In the first window there was a picture of him in one of the turrets of the tower. Farther on, he was seeking something in a chink in the wall. And the next picture was an opening an old cabinet with a golden key. And so it went through numbers of scenes, and presently the prince, noticing that another figure occupied the most important place in each scene, and this time it was a tall, handsome young man. Poor Prince Curlicue found it a pleasure to look at him. He was so straight and strong. By this time it had grown dark, and the prince had to go back to his own room, and to amuse himself he took up a quaint old book and began to look at the pictures. But his surprise was great to find that they represented the same scenes as the windows of the gallery, and what was more, that they seemed to be alive. And looking at the pictures of musicians, he saw their hands move and heard sweet sounds. There was a picture of a ball, and the prince could watch the little dancing people come and go. He turned a page, and there was an excellent smell of a savory dinner. And one of the figures who sat at the feast looked at him and said, "We drink to your health, Curlicue. Try to give us our queen again, for if you do, you will be rewarded. If not, it will be the worse for you." At these words the prince, who had been growing more and more astonished, was fairly terrified, and dropping the book with a crash, he sank back insensible. The noise he made brought his guards to his aid, and as soon as he revived, they asked him what was the matter. He answered that he was so faint and giddy with hunger that he imagined he saw and heard all sorts of strange things. Thereupon, in spite of the king's orders, the guards gave him an excellent supper, and when he had eaten it all again, he opened his book, but could see none of the wonderful pictures, which convinced him that he had been dreaming before. However, when he went to the gallery the next day and looked at the painted windows again, he found that they moved, and the figures came and went as if they had been alive. And after watching one who was like himself find the key in the crack of the turret wall and open the old cabinet, he determined to go and examine the place himself and try to find out what this mystery was. So he went up into the turret and began to search about and tap on the walls, and all at once he came upon the place that sounded hollow. Taking a hammer, he broke away at a bit of stone, and found behind it a little golden key. The next thing to do was to find the cabinet, and the prince soon came to it, hidden away in a dark corner, though indeed it was old and battered looking. That he would never have noticed it of his own accord. At first he could not see any keyhole, but after a careful search he found a hidden one in the carving, and the golden key just fitted it. So the prince gave a vigorous turn, and the doors flew open. Ugly and old as the cabinet was outside, nothing could have been more rich and beautiful than what he met to his eyes inside. Every drawer was made of crystal, of amber, or of some precious stone, and was quite full of every kind of treasure. Prince Curlicue was delighted. He opened one after another until at last he came to one tiny drawer which contained only an emerald key. "I believe this must be the little golden door in the middle," said the prince to himself. And he fitted the little key and turned it. The tiny door swung back, and a soft crimson light gleamed over the whole cabinet. The prince found that it proceeded from an immense glowing carbuncle made into a box which lay before him. He lost no time in opening it, but what was his horror when he found that it contained a man's hand, which was holding a portrait. His first thought was to pull back at the terrible box and fly down from the turret, but a voice in his ear said, "This hand belonged to one whom you can help and restore. Look at this beautiful portrait, the original of which was the cause of all my misfortunes. And if you wish to help me, go without a moment's delay to the great gallery. Notice where the sun's rays fall most brightly, and if you seek there, you will find my treasure." The voice ceased, and though the prince was in his bewilderment asked various questions, he received no answers. So he put back the box and locked the cabinet up again, and having replaced the key in the crack in the wall, hastened down to the gallery. When he entered it, all the windows shook and clattered in the strangest way, but the prince did not heed them. He was looking carefully for the place where the sun shone most brightest, and it seemed to him that it was upon a portrait of a most splendidly handsome young man. He went up and examined it, and found that it rested against an ebony and gold paneling, just like any other picture in the gallery. He was puzzled, not knowing what to do next, until it occurred to him to see if the windows would help him, and looking at the nearest, he saw a picture of himself lifting the picture from the wall. The prince took the hint, and lifting aside the picture without difficulty, found himself in a marble hall adorned with statues. From this he passed on through numbers of splendid rooms, until at last he reached one all hung with blue gauze. The walls were of turquoises, and upon a low couch lay a lovely lady, who seemed to be asleep. Her hair, black as ebony, was spread across the pillows, making her face look ivory white, and the prince noticed that she was unquiet. And when he softly advanced, fearing to wake her, he could hear her sigh and murmur to himself,
How dared you think to win my love by separating me from my beloved Florimond, and in my presence cutting off that dear hand that even you should have feared and honored?
And then the tears rolled slowly down the lovely lady's cheeks, and Prince Curlicue began to comprehend that she was under an enchantment, and that it was the hand of her lover that he had found. At this moment a huge eagle flew into the room, holding in its talons a golden branch, upon which were growing what looked like clusters of cherries, only every cherry was a single glowing ruby. This he presented to the prince, who guessed by this time that he was in some way to break the enchantment that surrounded the sleeping lady. Taking the branch, he touched her lightly with it, saying, Fair one, I know not by what enchantment thou art bound, but in the name of thy beloved Florimond I conjure thee to come back to life which thou hast lost, but not forgotten. Instantly the lady opened her lustrous eyes and saw the eagle hover near.
Stay, dear love, stay, she cried.
But the eagle, uttering a dolorous cry, fluttered his broad wings and disappeared. Then the lady turned to Prince Curlicue and said,
I know that it is you I owe my deliverance from an enchantment which has held me for 200 years. If there is anything that I can do for you in return, you only have to tell me, and all my fairy power shall be used to make you very happy.
Madam, said Prince Curlicue, I wish to be allowed to restore you to your beloved Florimond in its natural form, since I cannot forget the tears you shed for him.
That is very admirable of you, dear prince, said the fairy, but it is reserved for another person to do that. I cannot explain more at present, but there is nothing you wish for yourself?
Madam, cried the prince, flinging himself down at her feet, only look at my ugliness. I am called Curlicue, and am object of derision. I entreat you to make me less ridiculous.
Rise, prince, said the fairy, touching him with a golden branch. Be as accomplished as you are handsome, and take the name Prince Peerless, since that is the only title which will suit you now.
Silent from joy, the prince kissed her hand to express his thanks, and when he rose, he saw his new reflection in the mirrors which surrounded him. He understood that Curlicue was indeed gone forever.
How I wish, said the fairy, that I dared to tell you what is in store for you, and warn you of the traps which lie in your path, but I must not. Fly from the tower, prince, and remember that the fairy Durceline will be your friend always.
When she had finished speaking, the prince, to his great astonishment, found himself no longer in the tower, but set down in a thick forest at least 100 leagues away from it. And there we must leave him for the present, and see what is happening elsewhere. When the guards found that the prince did not ask for his supper as usual, they went into his room, and, not finding him there, were very much alarmed, and searching the tower from turret to dungeon, but without success. Knowing that the king would certainly have their heads cut off for allowing the prince to escape, they all agreed to say that he was ill, and after making the smallest among them look as much like Prince Curlicue as possible, they put him into his bed and sent to inform the king. King Grumpy was quite delighted to hear that his son was ill, for he thought that he would all the sooner be brought to do as he wished, marry the princess. So he sent back to the guards to say that the prince was to be treated as severely as before, which was just what they had hoped he would say. In the meantime, the Princess Cabbage Stalk had reached the palace, traveling in a litter. King Grumpy went out to meet her, but when he saw her, with a skin like a tortoise's, her thick eyebrows meeting above her large nose, and her mouth from ear to ear, he could not help crying out. "Well, I must say Curlicue is ugly enough, but I don't think you need to have thought twice before consenting to marry him."
"Sire," she replied, "I know too well what I am like to be hurt by what you say, but I assure you that I have no wish to marry your son. I'd rather be called Princess Cabbagestalk than Queen Curlicue."
This made King Grumpy very angry. "Your father has sent you here to marry my son," he said, "and you may be sure that I am not going to offend him by altering his arrangements." So the poor princess was sent away in disgrace to her own apartments, and the ladies who attended upon her were charged to bring her to a better mind. At this juncture, the guards, who were in great fear that they would be found out, sent to tell the king that his son was dead, which annoyed him very much. He at once made up his mind that it was entirely the princess's fault, and gave orders that she should be imprisoned in the tower in Prince Curlicue's place. The Princess Cabbagestalk was immensely astonished at this unjust proceeding, and sent many messages of remonstrance to King Grumpy, but he was in such a temper that no one dared to deliver them, or to send the letters which the princess wrote to her father. However, as she did not know this, she lived in hope of soon going back to her own country, and tried to amuse herself as well as she could until that time should come. Every day she walked up and down the long gallery until she too was attracted and fascinated by the ever-changing pictures in the windows, and recognized herself as one of the figures.
"They seem to have taken great delight in painting me since I came to this country," she said to herself. "One would think that my crutch were put in on purpose to make that slim, charming young shepherdess in the next picture look prettier by contrast. How nice it would be to be as pretty as that."
And then she looked at herself in a mirror, and turning away quickly with tears in her eyes from the doleful sight, all at once she became aware that she was not alone, for beside her stood a tiny old woman in a cap, who was as ugly again as herself, and quite as lame.
"Princess," she said, "your regrets are so piteous that I have come to offer you the choice of goodness or beauty. If you wish to be pretty, you have your way, but you will also be vain, capricious, and frivolous. If you remain as you are now, you shall be wise, amiable, and modest." "Madam," cried the princess, "it is impossible to be once wise and beautiful." "No, child," answered the old woman. "Only to you it is decreed that you must choose between the two. See, I have brought with me my white and yellow muff. Breathe upon the yellow side, and you will become like the pretty shepherdess you so much admire. And if you have the love of the handsome shepherd whose picture I have already seen you studying with interest, breathe upon the white side, and your looks will not alter, but you will grow better and happier day by day. Now you may choose." "Well," said the princess, "I suppose one can't have everything, and it's certainly better to be good than pretty."
And so she breathed upon the white side of the muff, and thanked the old fairy, who immediately disappeared. The Princess Cabbagestalk felt very forlorn when she was gone, and began to think it was quite time her father sent an army to rescue her.
"If I could but get up to the turret," she thought, "to see if anyone was coming."
But to climb up there seemed impossible. Nevertheless, presently hit upon a plan. The great clock was in the turret, as she knew, though the weights hung down into the gallery. Taking one of them off the rope, she tied herself in its place, and when the clock was wound up, she went triumphantly into the turret. She looked out over the country, the first thing, but seeing nothing, she sat down to rest a little, and accidentally leant back against the wall which Curlicue, or now Prince Peerless, had so hastily mended. Out fell the broken stone, and with it the golden key. The clatter it made upon the floor attracted the Princess Cabbage-Stalk's attention. She picked it up, and after a moment's consideration decided that it must belong to the curious old cabinet in the corner, which had no visible keyhole. And then it was not long before she had it open, and was admiring the treasures it contained as much as the Prince Peerless had done before her. And at last she came to the carbuncle box. No sooner had she opened it, with a shudder of horror she tried to throw it down, but found that some mysterious power compelled her to hold it against her will. And at this moment the voice in her ear said softly, "Take courage, Princess. Upon this adventure your future happiness depends."
"What am I to do?"
said the princess, trembling. "Take the box," replied the voice, "and hide it under your pillow, and when you see an eagle, give it to him without losing a moment." Terrified as the princess was, she did not hesitate to obey, and hastened to put back all the other precious things precisely as she had found them. By this time her guards were seeking her everywhere, and they were amazed to find her up in the turret, for they said she could only have got there by magic. For 3 days nothing happened. At the last night the princess heard something flutter against her window, and drawing back the curtains she saw in the moonlight that it was an eagle. Limping across at her utmost speed, she threw the window open, and the great eagle sailing in, beating his wings with joy. The princess lost no time in offering it the carbuncle box, which it grasped in its talons and instantly disappeared, leaving in its place the most beautiful prince she had ever seen, who was splendidly dressed and wore a diamond crown. "Princess," he said, "for 200 years has a wicked enchanter kept me here. We both loved the same fairy, but she preferred me. However, he was more powerful than I, and succeeded, when for a moment I was off my guard, into changing me into an eagle, while my queen was left in an enchanted sleep. I knew that after 200 years a prince would recall her to the light of day, and a princess, in restoring me the hand which my enemy had cut off, would give me back my natural form. The fairy who watches over your destiny told me this, and it was she who guided you to the cabinets in the turret, where she had placed my hand. It is she also who permits me to show you my gratitude by granting you forever whatever favor you may ask. Tell me, princess, what is it that you wish for most? Shall I make you as beautiful as you deserve to be?"
If only you would,"
cried the princess, and at the same moment she heard a crackling in all her bones. She grew tall and straight and pretty, with eyes like shining stars and a skin as white as milk.
"Wonderful! Can this really be my poor little self?"
she exclaimed, looking down in amazement at her tiny worn-out crutch as it lay upon the floor. "Indeed, princess," replied Florimond. "It is yourself, but you must have a new name, since the old one does not seem to suit you now. Be called Princess Sunbeam, for you are as bright and charming enough to deserve the name." Thank you. And so saying, he disappeared, and the princess, without knowing how she got there, found herself walking under shady trees by a clear river. Of course, the first thing she did was to look at her own reflection in the water, and she was extremely surprised to find that she was exactly like the shepherdess she had so much admired. and wore the same white dress and flowery wreath that she had seen in the painted windows. To complete the resemblance, her flock of sheep appeared, grazing round her, and she found a gay crook adorned with the flowers upon the bank of the river. Quite tired out by so many new and wondrous experiences, the princess sat down to rest at the foot of a tree, and there she fell fast asleep. Now, it happened that it was this very country that Prince Peerless had been set down, and while Princess Sunbeam was still sleeping peacefully, he came strolling along in search of a shady pasture for his sheep. The moment he caught sight of the princess, he recognized her as the charming shepherdess whose picture he had seen in the tower, and she was far prettier than he had remembered her. He was delighted that chance had led him that way. He was still watching her admiringly when the princess opened her eyes, and as she also recognized him, they were soon great friends. The princess asked Prince Peerless, as he knew the country both better than she did, to tell her of some peasant who would give her lodging, and he said he knew of an old woman whose cottage would be the very place for her. It was so nice and pretty. So they went there together, and the princess was charmed with the old woman and everything belonging to her. Supper was soon spread for her under a shady tree, and she invited the prince to share the cream and brown bread which the old woman provided. This he was delighted to do, and having first fetched from his own garden all the strawberries, cherries, nuts, and flowers he could find, they sat down together and were very merry. After this, they met every day as they guarded their flocks, and were so happy that Prince Peerless begged the princess to marry him, so that they might never be parted again. Now, though Princess Sunbeam appeared only to be a poor shepherdess, she never forgot that she was a real princess, and she was not at all sure that she ought to marry a humble shepherd, though she knew she would like to do so very much. So she resolved to consult an enchanter of whom she had heard a great deal since she had been a shepherdess, and without saying a word to anybody she set out to find the castle in which he lived with his sister, who was a powerful fairy, of course. The way was long and lay through a thick wood, where the princess heard strange voices calling to her from every side, but she was in such a hurry that she stopped for nothing, and at last she came to the courtyard of the enchanter's castle. The grass and briars were growing as high as if it were 100 years since anyone had set foot there, but the princess got through at last, though she gave herself a good many scratches on the way, and then she went into a dark, gloomy hall, where there was but one tiny hole in the wall through which the daylight could enter. The hangings were all bats' wings, and from the ceiling hung 12 cats, who filled the hall with their ear-piercing yells. Upon the long table 12 mice were fastened by the tail, and just in front of each one's nose, but quite beyond its reach, lay a tempting morsel of fat bacon. So the cats could always see the mice, but could not touch them, and their hungry mice were tormented by the sight and smell of the delicious morsels that they could never seize. Yeah, dude's a sadist. The princess was looking at the poor creatures in dismay when the enchanter suddenly entered, wearing a long black robe with a crocodile upon his head. In his hand he carried a whip made of 20 long snakes, all alive and writhing, and the princess was so terrified at the sight that she heartily wished that she had never come. Without saying a word she ran to the door, but it was covered with thick spider's web, and when she broke it she found another, and another, and another. In fact, there was no end of them. The princess's arms ached with tearing them down, and yet she was no nearer to getting out. And the wicked enchanter behind her laughed maliciously, and he said at last, "You spend the rest of your life over that without it ever doing any good. But as young as you are, and quite the prettiest creature I have seen for a long time, I will marry you if you like, and I will give you those cats and mice that you see there for your own. They are princes and princesses who happened to offend me. They used to love one another as much as they now hate one another. It's a pretty little revenge to keep them like that.
Oh, if you would only change me to a mouse too, cried the princess.
Oh, so you won't marry me, he said. Little simpleton, you should have everything your heart can desire.
No, indeed, nothing should make me marry you. In fact, I don't think I shall ever love anyone.
In that case, said the enchanter, touching her, you had better become a particular kind of creature that is neither fish nor fowl. You shall be light and airy, as green as the grass you live in. Off with you, Madam Grasshopper. And the princess, rejoicing in finding herself free once more, skipped out into the garden, the prettiest little green grasshopper in the world. But as soon as she saw she was safely out, she felt rather sorry for herself.
Froment, she sighed, is this the end of your gift? Certainly beauty is short-lived, and this funny little face and green cape dress are a comical end to it. I'd better have married an amiable shepherd. It must be for my pride that I am condemned to be a grasshopper and sing day and night in the grass by this brook, when I feel far more inclined to cry.
In the meantime, Prince Peerless had discovered the princess's absence and was lamenting over it by the river's brim, when he suddenly became aware of the presence of a little old woman. She was quaintly dressed in a ruff and farthingale, with a velvet hood covering her snow-white hair.
You seem sorrowful, my son, she said. What is the matter?
Alas, mother, cried the prince, I have lost my sweet shepherdess, but I am determined to find her again, though I should have traversed the whole world in search of her.
Go that way, my son, said the old woman, pointing towards a path that led to the castle. I have an idea that you will soon overtake her.
The prince thanked her heartily and set out. As he met with no hindrance, he soon reached the enchanted wood which surrounded the castle, and there he thought he saw the Princess Sunbeam gliding before him among the trees. Prince Peerless hastened at her to stop with his speed, but could not get any closer. Then he called to her, Sunbeam, my darling, only wait for me a moment. But the phantom did but fly the faster, and the prince spent the whole day in this vain pursuit. When night came, he saw the castle before him, all lighted up, and as he imagined the princess must be in it, he made haste to get there too. He entered without difficulty. In the hall, the terrible old fairy met him. She was so thin that a light shone through her, and her eyes glowed like lamps. Her skin was like a shark's. Her arms were as thin as lace, and her fingers like spindles. Nevertheless, she wore rouge and patches, a mantle of silver brocade, and a crown of diamonds, and her dress was covered with jewels, green and pink ribbons. Stunning, honestly. At last you have come to see me, Prince, she said. Don't waste another thought upon that little shepherdess who is unworthy of your notice. I am the Queen of the Comet, and can bring you the great honor if you will marry me. Marry you, madam? Cried the prince in horror. No, I will never consent to that. Thereupon the fairy, in a rage, gave 2 strokes of her wand and filled the gallery with horrible goblins, against whom the prince had to fight for his life. Though he had only his dagger, he defended himself so well that he escaped without any harm. And presently the old fairy stopped the fray and asked the prince if he was still in the same mind. When he answered firmly that he was, she called up the appearance of Princess Sunbeam to the other end of the gallery and said,
"You see your beloved there. Take care what you are about, for if you again refuse to marry me, she shall be torn to pieces by 2 tigers."
The prince was distracted, for he fancied he heard his dear shepherdess weeping and begging him to save her. In despair he cried, "Oh, fairy Dulcinea, have you abandoned me after so many promises of friendship? Help us now!" Immediately a soft voice came to his ear.
"Be firm, happen what may, and seek the golden branch."
This encouraged. The prince persevered in his refusal, and at length the old fairy, in fury, cried,
"Get out of my sight, obstinate prince! Become a cricket!"
And instantly the handsome Prince Peerless became a poor little black cricket, whose only idea was to find himself a cozy cranny between some blazing hearth, if he had not luckily remembered the fairy Dulcinea's injunction to seek the gold branch. So he hastened to depart from the fatal castle and sought shelter in a hollow tree, where he found a forlorn-looking little grasshopper crouching in a corner, too miserable to sing. Without the least expecting an answer, the prince asked it, "And where may you be going, Gamer Grasshopper?"
"Where are you going yourself, Gaffer Cricket?"
replied the grasshopper. "What? You can speak?"
"Why should I not speak as well as you? Isn't a grasshopper as good as a cricket?" she said.
"I can talk because I was a prince," said the cricket.
"And for that very same reason I thought to be able to talk more than you, for I was a princess," replied the grasshopper.
"And you have met the same fate as I have," he said. "But where are you going now? Can we not journey together?"
"I seemed to hear a voice in the air which said, 'Be firm, happen what may, and seek the golden branch,'" answered the grasshopper. "And I thought the command must be for me, so I started at once, though I don't know the way."
At this moment their conversation was interrupted by 2 mice, who, breathless from running, flung themselves headlong into the hole in the tree, nearly crushing the grasshopper and the cricket, though they got out of the way as fast as they could and stood up in a dark corner.
"Madams," the fatter of the 2, "I have such a pain in my side from running so fast. How does your highness find yourself?" "I have pulled off my tail," replied the younger mouse, "but as I should be on the sorcerer's table unless I had, I do not regret it. Are we pursued? Thank you. How lucky are we to escape?" "I only trust that we may escape cats and traps and reach the golden branch soon," said the fat mouse. "You know the way, then?" said the other. "Oh dear, yes, as well as the way in my own house, madam. The golden branch is indeed a marvel. A single leaf from it makes one rich forever. It breaks enchantments and makes all who approach it young and beautiful. We must set out for it at the break of day." "May we have the honor of traveling with you, this respectable cricket and myself?" said the grasshopper, stepping forward. "We are also on a pilgrimage to the golden branch."
The mice courteously assented, and after many polite speeches the whole party fell asleep. With the earliest dawn, there they were on their way, and though the mice were in constant fear of being overtaken or trapped, they reached the golden branch in safety. It grew in the midst of a wonderful garden, all the paths of which were strewn with pearls as big as peas. The roses were crimson diamonds with emerald leaves. The pomegranates were garnets, and the marigolds topazes, the daffodils yellow diamonds, the violets sapphires, the cornflowers turquoises, the tulips amethysts, opals, diamonds, so that the whole garden borders blazed like the sun. Yeah. The golden branch itself had become as tall as a forest tree, and sparkled with ruby cherries on its topmost twig. No sooner had the grasshopper and the cricket touched it than they were restored to their natural forms, and to their surprise and joy was great when they recognized each other. At this moment, Florimond and the fairy Doceline appeared in great splendor, and the fairy, as she descended from her chariot, said with a smile,
"So you two have found one another again, I see. But I have still a surprise left for you. Don't hesitate, Princess, to tell your devoted shepherd how dearly you love him, as he is the very prince your father sent you to marry. So come here, you both, and let me crown you, and we will have the wedding at once."
The prince and princess thanked her with all their hearts and declared that they owed her their happiness. And then the two princesses, who had so lately been mice, came and begged that the fairy would use her power to release their unhappy friends who were still under the enchanter's spell.
"Really," said the fairy Doceline, "on this happy occasion I cannot find it in my heart to refuse you anything."
And she gave 3 strokes of her wand upon the golden branch, and immediately all the prisoners in the enchanter's castle found themselves free, and came with all speed to the wonderful garden, where one touch of the golden branch restored each to their natural form, and they greeted each other with many rejoicings. To complete her generous work, the fairy presented them with a wonderful cabinet, and all the treasures it contained, which were worth at least 10 kingdoms. But to Prince Peerless and Princess Sunbeam she gave the palace and the garden of the Golden Branch, where, immensely rich and greatly beloved by all their subjects, they lived happily ever after. Wow, that story rambled. Man, I hate to have to break that one down on the scale. Let's see. Ugly Prince, Ugly Princess. Both get locked in the same tower. Both read the same story. Yet they're 2 different endings. Both of them get turned into shepherds and shepherdesses. Meet each other, fall in love. But the princess, thinking she's still a princess and should, marry a prince, goes to an enchanter for advice, and the enchanter traps her. So that's another trope there. Man, that just goes all over the place on the scale. The Golden Branch, everyone. Thank you for coming in, Altered, and thank you for coming in, Drift. I don't know how much people miss during the ad break. I always hate the ad breaks coming in. I have it set that it shouldn't cover the screen, but it should just be one of the side ones, but I don't know if Twitch ever pays any attention to the settings. Just like they play ads right after I run my own ads, so. Let's see. How long is this next story? Okay. Let's get one more done for the night. And let's see who's on to raid. I don't think I noticed Stream Elements running any of my timed responses, so not surprised at all. So our third story, and possibly last for the night, because it's kind of short, but I usually have to be done by 11. And I know the story after this is considerably longer, because the story after this one is Dapplegrim, and it's exceedingly long. So this story would be not 7, not 1, but the Three Dwarves. There once upon a time was a man who lost his wife, and a woman who lost her husband. And the man had a daughter, and so had the woman. The two girls were great friends, and often used to play together. One day the woman turned to the man's daughter and said,
"Go and tell your father that I will marry him, and then you shall wash in milk and drink wine, but my own daughter shall wash in water and drink it too."
The girl went straight home and told her father what the woman had said. "What am I to do?" he answered. "Marriage is either a success or it's a failure." True. At last, being of an undecided character and not being able to make up his mind, he took off his boot and handed it to his daughter, and said, "Take this boot, which has a hole in the sole, hang it up by a nail in the hayloft, and pour water into it. If it holds water, I will marry again. But if it doesn't, I won't." The girl did as she was bid, but the water drew the hole together, and the boot filled to the very top. So she went and told her father the result. He got up and went to see for himself, and when he saw that it was true and no mistake, he accepted his fate and proposed to the widow, and they were married at once. On the morning after the wedding, when the two girls awoke, milk was standing for the man's daughter to wash in, and wine for her to drink. But the woman's daughter only water to wash, and only water to drink. On the second morning, water to wash in and water to drink was standing for the man's daughter as well. On the third morning, water to wash in and water to drink was standing for the woman's daughter, and so it continued. The woman hated her stepdaughter from the bottom of her heart. Go figure. And she did all she could to make her life miserable. She was as jealous as she possibly could be, because the girl was so beautiful and charming, while her own daughter was both ugly and repulsive. One winter's day, when there was a hard frost, and the mountain and valley were covered with snow, the woman made a dress of paper, and calling the girl to her, said,
"Here, put on this dress and go out into the wood and fetch me a basket of strawberries."
"Now heaven help us," replied the stepdaughter. "Strawberries don't grow in winter, and the earth is all frozen, and the snow has covered up everything. And why send me in a paper dress? It is so cold outside, and one's breath freezing. The wind will whistle through my dress, and the brambles tear it from my body."
"How dare you contradict me?" said the stepmother. "Be off with you at once, or don't show your face again until you have filled the basket with strawberries."
Then she gave the girl her hard crust of bread, saying,
"That will be enough for you today," she thought to herself. "The girl will certainly perish of hunger and cold outside, and I shan't be bothered with her any more."
The girl was so obedient that she put on the paper dress and set out with her little basket. There was nothing but snow far and near, and not a green blade of grass to be seen anywhere. And when she came to a wood where she saw a little house, and out of it peeped 3 little dwarves. She wished them a good day and knocked modestly at the door. They called out to her to enter, and she stepped in and sat down on a seat by the fire, wishing to warm herself and eat her breakfast. The dwarf said at once, "Give us some of your food."
"Gladly,"
she said, and breaking her crust in two, she gave them half. Then they asked her what she was doing in the depths of winter in her thin dress.
"Oh," she answered, "I've been sent to get a basket full of strawberries, and I daren't show my face again at home until I bring them with me."
When she had finished her bread, they gave her a broom, and told her to sweep away some of the snow from the back door. As soon as she left the room to do so, the 3 little men consulted what they should give her as a reward for being so sweet and good, and for sharing her last crust with them. The first said,
Every day she shall grow prettier.
The second,
Every time she opens her mouth, a piece of gold shall fall out.
and the third,
A king shall come and marry her. Agreed. Yes, agreed.
The girl, in the meanwhile, was doing as the dwarfs had bidden her, and as she was sweeping the snow away from the back door, what do you think she found there? Heaps of fine, ripe strawberries that showed a dark red against the white snow. She joyfully picked enough to fill her basket and thanked the little men for their kindness and shook them by the hand and ran home to bring her stepmother what she had asked for. When she walked in and said,
Good evening.
a piece of gold fell out of her mouth. And then she told what happened to her in the wood, and at every word pieces of gold dropped from her mouth, so that the room was soon covered with them. She's chatty.
She's surely more money to wit to throw ground on like that,
said her stepsister, but in her secret heart she was very jealous, and determined that she, too, would go into the wood and look for strawberries. But her mother refused to let her go, saying,
My dear child, it is far too cold. You might freeze to death.
The girl, however, left her no peace, and she was forced at last to give in. But she insisted on putting her in a beautiful fur cloak, and she gave her bread and butter and cakes to eat on the way. The girl went straight to the little house in the wood, and as before the three little men were looking out of the window. She took no notice of them, but without so much as a by your leave, or by with your leave, she flounced into the room and sat herself down by the fire, and began to eat her bread and butter and cakes.
Give us some,
cried the dwarfs. But she answered,
No, I won't. It's hardly enough for myself, so catch me giving you any.
When she had finished eating, they said,
There's a broom for you. Go and clear up the back door. I'll see myself further, she said rudely. Do it yourselves. I'm not your servant.
When she saw that they did not mean to give her anything, she left the house in no amiable frame of mind. Then the little men consulted what they should do to her, because she was so bad and had such an evil, covetous heart that she grudged everybody their good fortune. The first one said,
She shall grow uglier every day.
The second,
Every time she speaks, a toad shall come out of her mouth.
The third,
She shall die a most miserable death.
Agreed.
Agreed.
The girl searched for strawberries, but she found none, and returned home in a very bad temper. When she opened her mouth to tell her mother what had befallen her in the wood, a toad jumped out, so that everyone was quite disgusted with her. Then the stepmother was more furious than ever, and did nothing but plot mischief against the man's daughter, who was daily growing more and more beautiful. At last, one day, the wicked woman took a large pot and put it on the fire and boiled some yarn in it. When it was well scalded, she hung it around the poor girl's shoulder, and giving her an axe, she bade her to break a hole in the frozen river and rinse the yarn. The stepdaughter obeyed as usual, and went and broke a hole in the ice. When she was in the act of wringing out the yarn, a magnificent carriage passed by, and the king sat inside. The carriage stood still, and the king asked her, My child, who are you, and what in the wide world are you doing here?
I'm only a poor girl, she answered, and I'm rinsing out my yarn in the river.
Then the king was very sorry for her, and when he saw how beautiful she was, and that coins were coming out of her mouth, he said, Will you come away with me? most gladly, she replied, for she knew how willingly she would leave her stepmother and sister, and how glad they would be to be rid of her. She stepped into the carriage and drove away with the king, and when they reached the palace, the wedding was celebrated with much splendor. So all turned out just as the little dwarves had said. After a year, the queen soon gave birth to a little son. When her stepmother heard of her good fortune, she came to the palace with her daughter by way of paying a call, and took up her abode there. Now, one day when the king was out and nobody else was near, the bad woman took the queen by her head, and the daughter took her by her heels, and they dragged her from the bed and flung her out the window into the stream which flowed beneath it. Then the stepmother laid her ugly daughter in the queen's place, and covered her up with the clothes, so that nothing could be seen of her. When the king came home and wished to speak to his wife, the woman called out,
Quietly, quietly. This will never do. Your wife is very ill. You must let her get her rest all day.
The king suspected no evil, and didn't come again until morning. When he spoke to his wife and she answered him, instead of the usual gold piece, a toad jumped out of her mouth. Then he asked what it meant, and the old woman told him that it was nothing but weakness, and that she would soon be all right again. But the same evening, a scullion noticed a duck swimming up the gutter, and sang as it passed,
What is the king? I pray you well. Is he awake or sleeps he well?
And, receiving no reply, it continued,
And all my guests, are they asleep?
And the scullion answered, Yes, one and all they slumber deep. Then the duck went on,
And what about my baby, dear?
and he answered, Oh, it sleeps soundly, never fear. Then the duck assumed the queen's shape, went up to the child's room, tucked him up comfortably in his cradle, and then swam back down the gutter again in the likeness of a duck. This was repeated for 2 nights, and on the 3rd the duck said to the scullion,
Go and tell the king to swing his sword 3 times over me on the threshold.
The scullion did as the creature bade him, and the king came to his sword and swung it 3 times over the bird, and lo and behold, his wife appeared before him once more, alive and blooming as ever. The king rejoiced greatly, but he kept the queen in hiding until the Sunday on which the child was to be christened. After the christening, he said, What punishment does a person deserve who drags another out of bed and throws him or her, as the case may be, into the water? Then the wicked stepmother answered,
No better fate than to be put into a barrel lined with sharp nails, and to be rolled down the hill into the water.
You have pronounced your own doom, then, said the king, and he ordered a barrel to be made lined with sharp nails, and in it he put the bad old woman and her daughter. Then he fastened down securely, and the barrel was rolled down the hill till it fell into the river. She was not that smart. So what about you, Chuck? What would you do? If a king ever asked you to decide what a punishment would be for something that you did that you don't think he knows about, it's not hypothetical. He's asking you what you want to do. And there are several different versions on how that one ends. Like, for instance, one of them is a pickle barrel. A pickle barrel with the vinegar still in it.
Vinegar plus stab wounds equals ouch. And having your own weight driving the nails into you does not help any more than that. Okay, I got half an hour left. I wonder. Should I read another story? Let's have the next one is Dapplegrim, and it's a little bit longer. Let's see, it's only 10 pages. Yeah, why not? I'll read it. We're good. Then I'll have to explain why in Red Dead Online I got a warhorse and made sure its coloring was Dapplegrim. Oh, Dapple Great Horse. But anyway, our real actual final story for the night. Dapplegrim. There once upon a time was a couple of rich folks who had 12 sons, and when the youngest was grown up, he would not stay home any longer, but would go out into the world to seek his fortune. His father and mother said that they thought he was very well off at home, and that he was welcome to stay with them, but he could not rest, and said that he must go and would go, so that at last they had to give him leave. When he had walked a long way, he came to a king's palace. There he asked for a place, and got it. Now, the daughter of the king of that country had been carried off into the mountains by a troll. And the king had no other children, and for this cause both he and his people were full of sorrow and affliction. And the king had promised the princess and half his kingdom to anyone who could set her free. But there was no one who could do it, though a great number had tried. So when the youth had been there for the space of a year or so, he wanted to go home again and pay his parents a visit. But when he got there, his father and mother were dead, and his brothers had divided everything that their parents possessed between themselves, so that there was nothing at all left for him. So then, I received nothing at all of my inheritance, said the youth. Who could know you were still alive? You have been wandering so long, answered the brothers. However, there are 12 mares upon the hills which have not yet been divided among us, and if you would like, you can have them for your share. You may take them. So the youth, well pleased with this, thanked them, and at once set off to the hill where the 12 mares were at pasture. When he got up there and found them, each mare had a foal, and by the side of one of them there was a big dapple-gray foal as well, which was so sleek that it shone. Well, my little foal, you're a fine fellow, said the youth.
Yeah, but if you kill all the other little foals that I can suck all the mares for a year, you shall see how big and handsome I shall be,
said the foal. So, the youth, not knowing any better, did this. He killed all the 12 foals and then went back again. The next year, when he came home again to look after his mares and the foal, it was as fat as it could be, and its coat shone with brightness, and it was so big that the lad had the greatest difficulty getting on its back. And each of the mares had another foal. Well, it's very evident that I lost nothing by letting you suck all my mares, said the lad to the yearling.
But now you are quite big enough, and you must come away with me."
"No," said the colt. "I must stay here another year. Kill the 12 little foals, and I can suckle the mares this year also, and then you shall see how big and handsome I become next summer."
So the youth did it again, and he went up to the hill the next year to look after his colt and the mares. Each of the mares had her foal again, but the dappled colt was so big that when he wanted to feel its neck to see how fat it was, he could not reach up to it. It was so high, and it was so bright that the light glanced off his coat. "Big and handsome you were last year, my colt, but this year you are ever so much handsomer," said the youth. "In all the king's courts no such horse is to be found, but now you shall come away with me."
"Nay,"
called the dappled colt once more.
"I must stay here for another year. Just kill the 12 little foals again, so that I can suck the mares this year also, and then come back and look for me in the summer."
So the youth did it. He killed all the little foals, and then went home again. But next year, when he returned to look after his dappled colt and the mares, he was quite appalled. He had never imagined that any horse could become so big and overgrown, for the dappled horse had to lie down on all fours before the youth could get on its back. And it was very hard to do, even at that, when it was lying down, and it was so plump that its coat shone and glistened as if it had been a looking-glass. This time the dappled horse was not unwilling to go away with the youth, so he mounted it. And when he came riding home to his brothers, they all smote their hands together and crossed themselves, for never in their lives had they ever seen or heard tell of such a horse.
"If you will procure me the best shoes for my horse, and the most magnificent saddle and bridle that can be found," said the youth, "you may have all my 12 mares as they are standing on the hill, and the 12 foals into the bargain."
For this year each mare also had a foal. The brothers were quite willing to do this, so the lad got such shoes for his horse that the sticks and stones flew high up in the air as he rode over the hills, and such a gold saddle and such a gold bridle that they could be seen glistening and glittering from afar. "And now we shall go to the king's palace," said Dapplegrim, for that was the horse's name. "But bear in mind that you must ask the king for a good stable and excellent fodder for me." The lad promised not to forget to do that. He rode to the palace, and it will be easily understood that, with such a horse as he had, he was not long on the way. When he arrived there, the king was standing out on the edge of the steps, and how did he stare at the man who came riding up! "Nay," he said, "never in my whole life have I seen such a man and such a horse." And when the youth inquired if he could have a place in the king's palace, the king was so delighted that he could have danced on the steps where he was standing, and there and then the lad was told that he should have a place. "Yes, but I must have a good stable and most excellent fodder for my horse," he said. So they told him that he should have sweet hay and oats, and as much of them as the dappled horse chose to have, and all the other riders had to take their horses out to the stable that Dapplegrim might stand alone and, have plenty of room. But this did not last long, for the other people in the king's court became envious of the lad, and there was no bad thing that they would not have done to him if they had but dared. At last they bethought themselves of telling the king that the youth had said that, if he so chose, he was quite able to rescue the princess who had been carried off to the mountain a long time ago by the troll. The king immediately summoned the lad into his presence, and said that they had been informed that he had said that it was in his power to rescue the princess, so now he was to do it, If he succeeded, he no doubt knew that the king had promised his daughter and half the kingdom to anyone who set her free, which promise should be faithfully and honorably kept. But if he failed, he should be put to death. The youth denied that he had said this, but all to no purpose, for the king was deaf to his words. So there was nothing to be done but say that he would make the attempt. He went down into the stable, very sad and full of care. Then Dapplegrim inquired to him why he was so troubled. Why the long face? And the youth told him, and said that he did not know what to do, for as setting the princess free, that was downright impossible.
Oh, but it might be done, said Dapplegrim. I will help you, but you must first have me well shod. You must ask for 10 pounds of iron and 12 pounds of steel for the shoeing, with one smith to hammer and one to hold.
As the youth did this, no one said nay. He got both iron and steel, and the smiths, and thus Dapplegrim shod strongly and well, and when the youth went out to the king's palace, and a cloud of dust rose up behind him. But when he came to the mountain into which the princess had been carried, the difficulty was to ascend its precipitous wall of rock, by which he was to get on the mountain beyond. For the rock stood right up on end, and steep as the side of a house, and as smooth as a sheet of glass. The first time the youth rode it, he got a little way up to the precipice. But then both Dapplegrim's forelegs slipped, and down came the horse and rider with a sound like thunder among the mountains. The next time that he rode it, he got a little further. But then one of Dapplegrim's forelegs slipped, and down they went with the sound of a landslip. Excuse me. But the third time, Dapplegrim said,
Now we must show what we can do,
and went at it once more until the stones sprang up sky high, and thus they got up. Then the lad rode into the mountain cleft at a full gallop and caught up the princess in his saddle bow, and then out again before the troll even had time to stand up. And thus the princess was set free. When the youth entered the palace, the king was both happy and delighted to get his daughter back again, as easily may be believed. But somehow or other the people about the court had so worked on him that he was angry with the lad as well.
Thou shalt have my thanks for getting the princess free,
said he, when the youth came into the palace with her, and was then about to go away. She ought to be just as much a princess as she is yours now, for you are a man of your word, said the youth.
Oh, yes, said the king.
Have her thou shalt, as I have said, but first, thou must make the sun shine into my palace here. For there was a large and high hill outside the windows which overshadowed the palace so much that the sun could not shine in. That was no part of our bargain, answered the youth, but nothing that I say will move you, I suppose. I shall have to try to do my best, for the princess I will have. So he went down to Dapplegrim again, and told him what the king desired. And Dapplegrim thought that it might easily be done, but first of all he must have new shoes. And 10 pounds of iron and 12 pounds of steel must go into the making of them. And 2 smiths were also necessary, one to hammer and one to hold. And then it would be very easy to make the sun shine into the king's palace. The lad asked for these things and obtained them instantly, for the king thought that, for very shame, he could not refuse them. So Dapplegrim got new shoes, and they were good ones, Nikes. The youth seated himself once more upon him, and once more they went on their way. And for each hop that Dapplegrim made, down went the hill 15 ells into the earth. And so they went on until there was no hill left for the king to see. Big horse. When the youth came down again to the king's palace, he asked the king if the princess should not at least be his, for now no one could say that the sun was not shining into the palace. But the other people in the palace had again stirred up the king, and he answered that the youth should have her, and that he had never intended that he should not, but first of all, he must get her quite a good horse to ride to the wedding on that which he had himself. The youth said that the king had never told him he was to do that, and it seemed now that he also had to really earn the princess. But the king stuck to it what he had said, and if the youth were unable to do so, he would lose his life. The youth went down to the stable again, and very sad and sorrowful he was, as, anyone might well imagine. Then he told Dapplegrim that the king had now required that he should get the princess as good a bridle horse as that which the bridegroom had.
Or he should lose his life.
But that will be no easy thing to do, he said, for your equal is not to be found in all the world.
Oh, yes, there is one to match me, said Dapplegrim, but it will not be easy to get him, for he is underground. However, we will try. Now you must go up to the king and ask for new shoes for me, and for them we must again have 10 pounds of iron and 12 pounds of steel, and 2 smiths, one to hammer and one to hold. But be very particular that you see that the hooks are very sharp, and that you must also ask for 12 barrels of rye, and 12 slaughtered oxen must be made with us, and all the 12 ox hides with 1,200 spikes set into them. All these things we must have. Likewise, a barrel of tar with 12 tons of tar in it.
The youth went to the king and asked for all the things that Dapplegrim had named, and once more the king thought that it would be disgraceful to refuse them to him, and he obtained them all. So he mounted Dapplegrim and rode away from the court. When he had ridden for a long, long time over hills and moors, Dapplegrim said,
Do you hear anything?
Yes, there's a dreadful whistling up above in the air that I think I'm growing alarmed, says the youth.
Yes. Oh, that is the birds of the forest flying about. They are sent to stop us, said Dapplegrim. But just cut a hole in the corn sacks, and then they will be so busy with the corn that they will forget all about us.
The youth did it. He cut holes in the corn sacks so that the barley and rye ran out of every side, and all the birds that were in the forest came in such a number that they darkened the sun. But when they caught sight of the corn, they could not refrain from it, but flew down and began to scratch and peck at the corn and rye, and at last they began to fight amongst themselves, and forgot all about the youth and Dapplegrim, and did them no harm. And now the youth rode onwards for a long, long time, over hills and dale, over rocky places and morasses, and then Dapplegrim began to listen again, and asked the youth if he heard anything now. Yeah, I hear a dreadful cackling, crashing in the forest on every side, that I think I shall be very afraid, said the youth.
That is all the wild beasts in the forest, said Dapplegrim. They're sent out to stop us, but just throw out the 12 carcasses of the oxen, and they will be so much occupied with them that they will quite forget about us.
So the youth threw out the carcasses of the oxen, and then the wild beasts of the forests, both bears and wolves, lions and grim beasts of all kinds, came. But when they caught sight of the carcasses of the oxen, they began to fight for them till blood flowed, and they entirely forgot about Dapplegrim and the youth. So the youth rode onwards again, and many were the new scenes they saw, for traveling on Dapplegrim's back was not traveling slowly as may be imagined. And then Dapplegrim neighed.
Do you hear anything? He said.
Yes, I hear something like a foal neighing quite plainly, a long, long way off, said the youth. It's a full-grown colt, said Dapplegrim, if you hear it so plainly when it is so far, far away from us. So they travelled onwards a long time, and one saw a new scene after another once more. Then Dapplegrim neighed once again. Do you hear anything now? Said he. Yes, now I hear it quite distinctly, and it neighed like a full-grown horse, answered the youth. You will hear it soon, very soon, said Dapplegrim, and then you will have to hear what a voice it has. So they travelled on through many more different kinds of country, and then Dapplegrim neighed for a third time. But before he could ask the youth if he heard anything, there was such a neighing on the other side of the heath that the youth thought the hills and rocks would be rent to pieces. No, he is here, said Dapplegrim. Be quick and fling over the hawk's hides that have the spikes on them. Throw the 12 tons of tar over the field and climb up into a great spruce fir tree. When he comes, fire will spurt out of both his nostrils, and then the tar will catch fire. No, mark what I say. As flame ascends, I conquer. As the flame sinks, I fail. But if you see that I am winning, fling the bridle which you must take off of me over his head, and then he will become quite gentle. Just as the youth had flung all the hides with the spikes over Dapplegrim and the tar over the field, and he had gotten safely up into the spruce fir, a horse came with flames sprouting out of his nostrils, and the tar caught fire in a moment. And Dapplegrim and the horse began to fight until stones leapt into the sky. They bit, and they fought with their forelegs and their hind legs, and sometimes the youth looked at them, and sometimes he looked at the tar, but at last the flames began to rise. For wherever the strange horse bit, or wherever it kicked upon the spikes in the hides, and at length he had to yield. When the youth saw that, he was not long for getting down from the tree and flinging the bridle over the horse's head. And then he became so tame that he might have been led by a thin string. This horse was dappled too, and so like Dapplegrim that no one could distinguish one from the other. The youth seated himself on the dappled horse which he had captured, and rode home again to the king's palace, and Dapplegrim ran loose by his side. When he got there, the king was standing outside in the courtyard. Can you tell me which is the horse I've caught, and which is the one I had before? Said the youth. If you can't, I think your daughter is mine. The king went and looked at both the dappled horses. He looked high, he looked low, he looked before, and he looked behind. But there was not a hair's difference between the two of them. No, said the king, I can not tell thee. And thou hast procured such a splendid bridal horse for my daughter, thou shalt have her. But first, we must have one more trial, just to see if thou art fated to have her. She shall hide herself twice, and then thou shalt hide thyself twice. If thou canst find her each time that she hides herself, and if she cannot find thee in thy hiding places, then it is fated. Then shalt thou have the princess. That too is not a bargain, said the youth, but we will make this trial since it must be so. So the king's daughter was to hide herself first. Then she changed herself into a duck, and lay swimming in a lake that was just outside the palace. But the youth went down to the stable and asked Dapplegrim what she had done with herself. Oh, all that you have to do is take your gun and go down to the water and aim at the duck which is swimming about there, and she will soon discover herself, said Dapplegrim. The youth snatched up his gun and ran to the lake. Oh, just have a shot at that duck, he said, and began to aim at it. No, dear friend, don't shoot, it is I, said the princess, and so he had found her once. The second time the princess changed herself into a loaf, and laid herself on the table among 4 other loaves, and she was so like the other loaves that no one could see any difference between them. But the youth again went down to the stable to Dapplegrim, and told him that the princess lay hidden herself again, and he had not the least idea what had become of her. "Oh, just take a large bread knife, sharpen it, and pretend that you are going to cut straight through the third of 4 loaves which are lying on the kitchen table in the king's palace. Count them from right to left, and you will soon find her," said Dapplegrim. So the youth went up to the kitchen and began to sharpen the largest bread knife that he could find. Then he caught a hold of the 3rd loaf on the left-hand side and put a knife to it as if he meant to cut it straight in 2. "I will have a bit of this bread for myself."
"No different! Don't cut it as I!"
said the princess again, and so he found her the second time. And now it was his turn to go hide himself. But Dapplegrim had given him such good instructions that it was not easy to find him. He first turned himself into a horsefly, and hid himself in Dapplegrim's left nostril. The princess went poking about and searching everywhere, high and low, and wanted to go into Dapplegrim's stall too, but he began to bite and kick about so that she was afraid to go in, and could not find the youth.
"Well," she said, "as I am unable to find you, you must show yourself. I am Oxenfree."
Whereupon the youth immediately appeared, standing there on the stable floor. Dapplegrim told him that he was due the second time, and he turned himself into a lump of earth, and stuck himself between the hoof and the shoe of Dapplegrim's left forefoot. Once more the king's daughter went and sought everywhere, inside, outside, up until she came into the stable, and she wanted to go straight into the stall beside Dapplegrim. So this time he allowed her to go into it, and she peered about high and low, but she could not look under his hoofs, for he stood much too firmly on his legs for that, and she could not find the youth.
"Well, you will just have to show you where you are yourself, for I can't find you," said the princess,
and in an instant the youth was standing by her side on the floor of the stable. "Now you are mine," he said to the princess. "You can see that it is fated that she should be mine," he said to the king. "Yes, fated it is," said the king. "So what must be, must." Then everything was made ready for the wedding, with great splendor and promptitude, and the youth rode to church on Dapplegrim, and the king's daughter on the other horse, so everyone must see that they could not be long to get there either. What is it with kings not wanting to get rid of their daughters? I mean, really, come on. How many trials you gotta face to get married? I mean, as this marriage isn't a trial on its own. Alright, so 4 fairy tales. Not bad. So, if we have any raid suggestions, by all means, pop them up in chat. If not, I'll look around myself. As I have gotten more likely to raid friends. But if you have suggestions, I will consider them. I'm not even sure who I was on anymore. Let's see.
Who is on? Look over my follow list to see who's here. Do. Because that doesn't do any good for me to look up story time because there's very few people who actually play that game. Which is why I choose to use it for telling stories. Let's see. Oh, Magnus is playing Power Simulator. And I wish I could play video games on my computer. It would make things so much easier. I mean, the games that I've played on my computer are like puzzle games at the most. I can't play any action games, so I have a hard time being able to play with people on my computer. I don't have any problem playing on my Xbox or PS4, but to do them on my streams, I have to remote play them, which isn't that big of a problem, but I don't get to play with other people. I thought Oni was on. Did Oni not stream? Or did Oni already end? Yeah, Waste was on. I guess Oni didn't... Isn't streaming? Check. Oh, Oni's on. Oni, are you lurking, though? Do I get to surprise you? There's people on my following list that I don't even recognize the names of, so it's like people I've followed and have changed their names since then. It's weird. Oh, wait, Ping is still on. Where is she? Let me check. Da-da-da-da-da-da-da, almost world. Why am I doing that? I don't know. Give me an woo. A woo me. Pang. There we go. Much woo. No, I'm gonna raid Pang. I don't get to raid her very often. We don't stream at the same times. Raid dash followers. Now if you actually post kill, I'm gonna have to figure out what's my timer's not working. Okay, and raid for subs, which really should be accessible for followers too. But I found out the hard way that the free emotes that you get for being a follower in the stream aren't always accessible in other streams. I'm not sure why, but it just happens that way. So we're gonna read Ping. Provided I can spell her name right. Okay, yeah, I spelled it right. Cool. So thank you all for coming in tonight. I hope you enjoyed the fairy tales and my random cut-ins, because I can't read a fairy tale without commenting. It's just my nature. If you've read my book, you should know by now, because I put inserts in that thing the entire time. But again, thank you all for coming in. I hope you have a good evening, good night, whichever it is. And if I don't see you beforehand, I hope you have a very happy New Year. And don't drink too much on New Year's Eve. Do kiss someone you like. I don't know. If you get a chance, feel free to kiss. Consensually, please. Because, don't just kiss random people without, getting permission. Hell, kiss anyone you want. I don't know. But, I'll see you over in Pings. Have a good one.